The question of reform might seem a slightly strange one for radical media, in that obviously the question of reform is going to involve having to talk to government, look at different legal policies, all the kind of stuff that often kind of radical media tends to ignore and try to exist on the sidelines. However, what we're going to talk about is a number of different areas where actually reform is absolutely necessary, because these are areas that do impact on the ability of radical media to grow, to move on, and unfortunately we do exist in a situation where large parts of control of the media are still in the hands of corporate bodies, and controlled or increasingly not controlled by the state, allowing figures like Murdoch to dominate the sphere and squeeze everything else out. And one major example of where a difference in the way that the law and the state deals with aspects of media is in the comparison between how Indymedia has historically been treated compared to Redwatch. And don't know what those sites are. Well, I presume everyone knows what Indymedia is, an open publishing tool where everyone puts stuff up. It's an activist tool. It's been around for over 10 years now. Redwatch, a site that puts pictures, phone numbers, and home addresses of left-wing activists up and anti-racist activists up, so that skinheads can go around and firebomb their homes. And that's not an exaggeration, that has happened a number of times to their poster boy of left journalists, Pete Lazenby in Yorkshire, where they did. Unfortunately for the people who moved in, the firebombed his old house because they don't have a dated address. But this kind of thing has happened. Now, historically, what's happened, Indymedia have been targeted by the authorities twice. Once by the FBI working on behalf of apparently the Swiss authorities in the UK, officially without the knowledge of the UK police, which is an amazing example of how the law works on some people's behalf and not others. And that was the period when their servers were seized in the UK, taking down from actually 5 national Indymedia sites. More recently then there was a situation in Bristol where there was a situation where somebody had posted the personal details of judges who were involved from the animal rights side. They were immediately removed from the site, but the police seized their servers to try and look at the logs. In Indymedia's case, they don't actually record logs, they have an auto-delete function to delete the log, so the police kept the computer, saying that they had failed to actually provide them with what the police needed. They couldn't, so the police kept the computer. As far as I know, the server was in their possession for at least 2 years. I'm not 100% sure whether they've ever got it back yet. On the other hand, Redwatch is managed by people in the UK, fairly well known who they are. They're either current or former members of the BNP and activism on that side. But because the website is hosted externally, there's 4 different countries where it's been placed, and countries with no, basically no system in place to take down websites. Even though it's clearly in breach of UK law, nothing has been done about it at all, and it's currently going through something of a revival as far-right activists have discovered Facebook and the ability to create fake profiles, friend lots of anti-Nazi activists and steal pictures from them and steal their personal details from Facebook. And it's been updated now more than it has been in years. So there's a very obvious case where the law impacts absolutely directly and in a very partial and unequal way on radical media. Then we just need to look at the situation of the Murdoch press and the free rein Murdoch has been given for 20-odd years to kick unions out, to not give workers any right, to exploit their rights, and to bring the mainstream UK media to a situation where it's virtually impossible for any kind of alternative media to exist on that level. And then there's the question of the kind of future regulation of the internet and what the real questions are. There's a big debate in the US about net neutrality, but what does that actually mean? And what does it mean particularly in the UK context, which is a very different regulatory environment? And what are the real questions that we need to grapple with to ensure not a very simple catch-all idea like neutrality, but actually what changes are needed to ensure people continue to have, or maybe even get, a level playing field in terms of being able to broadcast on the net and use the different tools that are available. And the question is whether a level playing field even exists at the moment to defend is a big question. So we've got a range of speakers here. Tim Gopsel is former editor of the NUJ's magazine and now works for the Campaign for Press and Broadcast Freedom, and he'll go through. Thijs Vertillo-Schumten was the mother of the chapel, as we in the NUJ call our reps, in the recent South London NewsQuest strike, and now works for the Hacked Off campaign. And Gary Herman is chair of the NUJ's New Media Industrial Council and has basically put together the NUJ's policy on net neutrality. So I'll ask Tim to.
I'm very, very pleased to be sitting in this room. As it happens, this is the very room where our my NUJ branch has its meetings. And in fact, on Monday, I'm going to be sitting here, and I hope we'll have a few more people at the London Freelance branch meeting than we have tonight. So I'm very familiar with coming across here. When I came out of Euston Station this morning, I stopped to have a cup of coffee and sat in the Cafe Nero there. And sitting outside at a table was a sad person. There's a lot of fucked up people around in this society. And it was one of these old boys, and he's got his bags, and he was just sitting shouting non-stop on his own, And you don't listen particularly to what these people are saying. I was sitting at the next table, and suddenly I heard him say, "Fucking Rupert Murdoch, bastard Rupert Murdoch." And I thought, right, now that is interesting. If the issue of the crimes of the corporate media have now got that far into public consciousness, because that's where we are at the moment. And what the title I've kind of given what I'm going to talk about. I'm a straight man here because I've been asked to speak about media regulation, and we are in the middle of the biggest crisis that the corporate media has ever had, caused by the exposure of the crimes of the news in the world and the Murdoch press in general, and the way the Murdoch press, and I'm a journalist, and so is everyone here. All journalists of any consciousness at all are very conscious of the damage that the corporate, particularly Murdoch press, has done to our trade over the last 20, 30 years. And those of us who have been fighting it and trying to resist all that time are naturally quite elated by what's happened. There's quite a lot of triumphalism around, but it's a question of capitalising on this public revulsion for new measures about the media, and that's what I've been asked to talk about, is media regulation. So I'm going to talk mostly about pretty straight media, because there is a campaign for press and broadcasting freedom has been involved in it for a long time, to introduce measures at the state level to give people a chance to answer back to the corporate media. I'm going to whiz through this quite quickly because it's issues that all of us here really have been involved in over many years. But the question of media regulation, there's two kinds of media regulation, because there have been two kinds of media in Britain. This is something, if you talk about straight media, that has to be understood. There's broadcast media, which is tightly regulated, not just on ownership, but on content. BBC and all commercial broadcasters are currently obliged by law to report with impartiality and fairness and put all sides of the case, and taste and decency and all the rest of it. Quite strict regulations, though it's obviously lessened over a period of deregulation of the last 20 years or so. And then you have the press, which is completely unregulated, it's completely out of control. In fact, whose very raison d'etre and whose very strength is that the press in Britain, with its long tradition of independence, is outrageous, over the top, sensationalist, and the strength of British journalism, and I have to say this as a journalist union person, that you go around the world and actually British journalism is better than most, and it comes from this creative tension between these two kinds of journalism, the wildly unregulated and the strictly regulated, because the same journalists work for both and they work to more or less the same criteria. That has been actually quite a valuable thing, because if you're thinking of the Murdoch press as the worst kind of press in Britain, there's also a very good press in Britain, and the fact is that the exposure of the Murdoch press was done by the corporate media, by The Guardian, and particularly Nick Davis and the editor, Alan Rusbridge, who has to have the credit for following the story when everybody was telling him to drop it. And so there's the good and the bad. Now, the period there's been deregulation going on in both in terms of ownership and control and in terms of content for the last 20 years. And in one sentence, the concern that people campaigning about the media have is that broadcasting is becoming like newspapers. As regulation is relaxed, then broadcasting itself, under the influence of Murdoch more than anybody, with Sky, and of course in America he has Fox. I'm sure you've all read about Fox. We are going to lose that valuable part of British media, which is the responsible, impartial, I mean, we all know the Chomsky model of this, but in terms of mass media, that is a very valuable thing to have. But now, of course, we have a third kind of media, and that is the new media. That is the internet and the bloggers and people who are outside any regulation and are rather like newspapers. So there is now a big debate going on in media circles about what kind of regulation there should be to tighten up after the Murdoch crisis. And I've put a copy of Free Press out here, and I've got here as well copies of a leaflet we produced at the SEEK Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom called A Chance for Change, which has got our specific policies in, the things that people are going to be arguing for in the process over the next couple of years. There's a government commission, the Leveson Commission, you've probably read about, which is looking into not just investigating the phone hacking and worse that the commercial media have got up to, but also going to be looking at media regulation. Now, at the moment, the broadcast media are regulated by Ofcom, which is a state agency. The newspapers and their websites are supposedly regulated by a thing called the Press and Complaints Commission, which is dead. I mean, it's still going, but I mean, it's completely discredited. It's been involved. It's a crucial part of the cover-up of the news of the world with the police and government and the owners of the Murdoch press. So there is going to be some kind of new regulatory body, and there's lots of proposals about what it can do, but the most important thing it can do is to give people the chance to answer back to the commercial media. And this is the policy that we call the right of reply. And the Campaign for Press and Broadcasting Freedom for years has been involved in trying to get legislation for a right to reply. That means anybody who's been maligned or misquoted or misrepresented or traduced in some way has an automatic statutory right to get their reply in to the medium concerned. Now, of course, and this has always been resisted, but the CPVF has actually promoted at least 4 parliamentary backbench bills by backbench MPs, all of which have come to grief because no government has ever thought of allowing such a law to be brought in, because they were completely under the thumb of the media. We all know about that kind of relations between not just the Tories but the Labour government and the Murdoch press over the years. But the new thing, of course, is the websites and the internet. And the internet is made for a right to reply. The whole structure of online media is that they have the facility for people to reply. And anybody can reply. Most media do open themselves up to comments in some way or another, but you might say, well, the comments that you can put on doesn't mean anything. You know, you can put up if they don't like it, they'll delete it. If it's slagging them off. So what is being talked about is some kind of a mechanism to make publications, to force publications, and it might need the power of the law to do it, to carry replies online to all print as well as online publications. And where that would go is at the top of the comment column, and it will be put there with the force of law. In other words, it would be ordered by the thing, the name most people use is something like the News Publishing Commission to replace the Press and Complaints Commission, which is supposedly self-regulated but entirely run by the industry. It will be independent of government and independent of the industry, which is the important thing. So if you're entitled to the right to reply, it goes at the top of the comments at the bottom of an article, and it has to be put there, and it has to stay there, and there's a little logo, a little icon that says this has been put there by order. Now, we're keen that people should get involved in this campaign wider than the traditional constituency of people like us and the NUJ and the CPPF and the Voice of the Listener and Viewer. And there are other organisations that have been around for years in media campaigning. That this, using the public revulsion at what's happened with the Murdoch press and their corrupt relations with the government and everybody else, should get involved in this campaign. So I've circulated to everybody a copy of Free Press, our newsletter. I've also got the copies that I'd like to give to people of this leaflet, which has got the policies. I won't go into the details now, you can read them yourself, it's quite detailed. And I've also brought along another interesting thing, which is copies of the Wapping Post. Now, I don't know, lots of people here will remember the Wapping dispute. This year is the 20th anniversary of it, and I've been involved in, there's a travelling exhibition about the Great Wapping Strike that's going around. It's currently showing at Goldsmiths College in London. It's going to Manchester in a couple of weeks' time. It's going to show at venues all around the country. And of course, for the 5,000 workers who were sacked by Murdoch when he moved his production to the Wapping factory in 1986, there's a glorious kind of vindication in 25 years later to see Rupert Murdoch brought low. And the strikers, when they were on strike, produced a paper called the Wapping Post, which was a brilliant paper. It wasn't dominated by union officials, it was a rank and file paper. It was really good. So just for fun, we brought out this year an anniversary issue of the Wapping Post with the headline, "Poor old Rupert, humbled and rumbled." You can take copies of that as well. So that's my quick run through of media regulation.
Okay, so I want to talk about, in contrast to some, as Tim pointed out, some of the organisations that existed for a very long time, a new organisation that's come out specifically out of what's happened recently, which is Hacked Off.
Right. So I'm going to start by telling you guys how Hacked Off, started, existing. Which is, I only joined 4 months ago, but it was a project by Martin Moore from the Media Standards Trust and Professor Brian Cathcart from Kingston University. Since 2009, when the first stories broke about phone hacking, and there was the failed select committee, completely failed to look into it, failed to do anything. Martin and Brian had the idea of launching a campaign to push for a public inquiry into the phone hacking and other illegal practices and legal information gathering by the press. So they worked very hard to sort of put together what the campaign would do for 2 years, and they had this launch date, which was the 6th of July this year. I don't know if you guys remember the exact date, but the Millie Dowler story broke on the 4th of July. And we didn't know. We had no idea. By that time, I had started working for the campaign. And we had no idea that story was going to come out on the 4th of July, 2 days before our launch. So we were a bit, what are we going to do now? Like, it's just all happening so fast. So we had to launch our website one day before the planned date, and then we had this launch in the House of Lords on the 6th of July. By that time, we already had we launched a petition with the website, and we had about 5,000 signatures, which basically we got them in a day, and we just the response was so overwhelming, because for the first time, it wasn't a story about a celebrity's phone being hacked, or footballers or politicians' phone being hacked. It was a murdered schoolgirl's phone being hacked and her messages deleted, and the family made to believe that she may have still been alive, and that woke up this country to the whole issue of what was going on in newsrooms, mainly of newspapers like the News of the World and others that we're going to get there, that were brought into this. And so we were a campaign, but back then we were campaigning for a public inquiry. The Prime Minister announced the public inquiry by the end of that week. So we were left a little bit kind of scratching our heads and thinking, what do we do now? But obviously, just the fact that they've announced a public inquiry doesn't mean that, you know, it's all done. You know, that's it. Yeah, no, campaign's successful. You know, let's wrap up and that's it. So we started working on the terms of reference for the inquiry, because we the idea of the campaign is that it should happen under the Inquiry Act 2005, so they could have powers to sort of, you know, subpoena people to come and give evidence under oath, you know, which in the end we had meetings with all three party leaders, and you know we said, which is kind of what Don was saying, that you guys don't like the government very much, do you? So and we just had to. The whole thing of the campaign is that, you know, we have to talk to the lawmakers and the policymakers, you know, and we had to, because of the experience of the background of the Media Standards Trust, especially, you know, with press reform, you know, there's been quite a few works that I've published in the last 5 years by the Media Standards Trust into, you know, the state of the press in this country. But anyway, so we started sort of drafting terms of reference and trying to take them, you know, to the party leaders, and in the end we managed to get, I think, about 90% of the terms of reference of the inquiry were drafted by the Hacked Off campaign, which we have our drafts in our papers, and you know, and when we saw the sort of final terms of reference as announced by David Cameron, we were very pleased. The only thing that they didn't include in the terms of reference, I think, that we suggested was that Leveson should look into the relationship between the press and civil servants, and it was the only thing that they left out from what we suggested. And then after that, we decided we've been debating quite a lot, you know, the issue of press reform. Because lots of people have been coming out and suggesting lots of new models of, you know, regulation or self-regulation, independent regulation, and you know, I was just the Martin Orr from the Media Standards Trust, he published a paper, I think it was about a couple of weeks ago, with 7 possible different, you know, models of regulation. So quite a lot of people have been involved in this discussion, which is good. It's a very good thing, and we sort of kept debating, and we went to the party conferences. We thought it would be a good opportunity, you know, to have more debate with politicians and, you know, with the delegates and, you know, from all the 3 main parties, and just been going everywhere and talking to people and trying to, well, we've been campaigning, we've been trying to get people to get on board with us, because the idea now is that we are going to follow the Leveson inquiry very closely, because we shouldn't just leave it, you know, we shouldn't just leave it. It's not because, you know, we don't trust him, but just because it's, you know, it's not done. It's still it's going to be a very long process. This inquiry has a very wide scope, and it's Lord Justice Leveson is going to have to look into so many things for the next 12 months before he has to report back. He's already hinted that, you know, he's probably not going to be able to report within 12 months. And the interesting thing about, I mean, I don't know if you guys have been following it, but last week, on Thursday, we had the first seminars open to the public, the Leveson inquiry did. So we had quite a sort of an audience of guests, of people who were in fact people from the industry, editors and sort of owners of newspapers, former editors, and it was a big, I think, if anything happened in that room, the British press would be doomed forever, because everyone who works at the top of the industry right now was in that room. So we had Professor Brian Cathcart and people like Phil Hall, who's a former editor of yeah. And we had Trevor Kavanagh, who's quite an interesting man. And so we had a good mix of people who are you know, calling for more responsibility within the British press, and people who have a past of working with tabloids. And it was very interesting to see how defensive the tabloids are in this whole issue, and how them being defensive means that they're going to attack, which they have already. So, and the attack have been coming in many forms, especially, you know, the campaign, which is, they were trying to say we're trying to muzzle the press, and we're trying to destroy popular press in this country, and, you know, all sorts. And they've been, we had Richard Pepiat, I don't know if you guys remember, Richard Pepiat was is a former Daily Star reporter who he resigned, and he wrote an open letter to Richard Desmond saying, you know, your newspaper is, you know, Islamophobic, and I've been asked to do things that I don't want to do anymore. I don't want to write stories the way you guys tell me to write stories. I've been bullied into doing things that I didn't want to do. And, you know, so he spoke at the seminar, and he was actually kind of hounded by Daily Star people who were there. A couple of lawyers stood up and said, you weren't even a sort of full-time reporter in a paper, you were a casual sort of reporter. And then obviously he back saying casuals work pretty much as much as, you know, full-time. You're in the newsroom 5 days a week. It doesn't matter. That's a pretty lame thing to say, to trying to point out that, you know, what the story I'm telling here of the way I've been treated in that newsroom is not true, because maybe I wasn't there for long enough. No. So they a lot of you know, people from the Mail on Sunday, from Peter Wright was there from the Mail on Sunday, and from someone from the Telegraph as well, and they were, the words that I have to say are, they were in denial about what happens in the newsrooms of you know, tabloid newspapers in this country, because anyone who has worked for a tabloid newspaper newsroom, or who has had any contact or any insight into sort of the way they work, knows that reporters have no say on anything. They're just told what to do, and they have to do it. And if you say you're not going to do something, that's you up the door, and you probably with a threat that you're never going to work, you know, for a tabloid newspaper ever again. So it's an interesting thing how they've been, you know, so reluctant, but obviously because they're fighting for survival, as they put it, so reluctant to accept that the culture in the newsrooms, which is quite an important thing, needs to change. And it's my whole point, you know, by saying this is, you can look at 1,000 forms of regulation. You can look at statutory regulation. You can look at independent regulation with the statutory backstop. You can look at self-regulation. It doesn't matter, because if you know, there should be some sort of, you know, something better than the PCC, I think, because actually the PCC code of practice is actually very good. I happen to think is actually, you know, having worked as a journalist for a while, I happen to think the PCC code of practice is good. Is, you know, it's just the fact that the PCC has acted as a mediator, and not a very good one, for a long time, and had, as many people have been saying, had no teeth. You know, they had no teeth dealing with, you know, abuses by mainly the tabloid press. But you can look at all of these things. You can look at and we are, and you know, we're taking this to Leveson, and you know, we're hoping to be heard. We're hoping an inquiry will come up with some good recommendations on, you know, that area. But what needs to change is obviously the culture in the newsrooms, and people need to understand that, you know, newspaper editors, they have a lot of power. They know that. They have a lot of power. And unfortunately, they've been lacking responsibility. And I think the phone hacking episodes, and I hear a lot more will come out, not just phone hacking, all sorts of illegal practices. You know, we're going to have to wait until the end of the police investigation, but you know, other newspapers I hear will also be implicated in all this. But they just need to understand that, you know, they've lost the trust that they used for so long to operate with. Which is, you know, that's how journalists operate. Trust. You know, you find out someone's story. For instance, a very specific example. You go to someone, you want to tell their story. They tell you their story, so you can tell. You know, so you're going to be the one who's going to write it down and publish on the pages of your newspaper, and so they trust you. And that's just an example. You know, so a lot of the times actually. You get a phone call the next day, or journalists get a phone call the next day when the paper comes out and say, "What have you done to my story? You know, I didn't say that. That's not true." You know, and so there should be a big relationship of trust between the press and the public. You know, obviously I'm not even going to enter all the alleged sort of criminal activity when it comes to police and the press and all that. But mainly with the public, which is, I think, what regulation would be looking into. They need to keep their trust, and unfortunately, with this scandal, with the phone hacking scandal, that is pretty much gone. And that's why everyone is so confused about everything, about what sort of regulation it should have, what is going to happen to newspapers here, how the press is going to operate, and just am I running out of time? Just quickly, just to say about, so not to escape the subject of digital media here. Obviously, it's so hard to sort of regulate or even look into what happens on the internet, because it's the internet. It's just anyone can publish, anyone can say anything, and I have to say, we haven't looked into it. We are mainly focusing on what's going to happen to newspapers, and obviously newspapers have websites, and so how those two are going to be regulated or not regulated, or sort of definitely not controlled. That's not what we want. But yeah, I mean, I think there's going to be a very big challenge, going forward. To find out a way of ensuring that people still have freedom to publish. That's the main thing. People should have freedom to publish, freedom of expression, and freedom of press, and all that. But I mean, how do you teach people responsibility? I think that's the main thing. I think that's something that people should never stop debating. And as for the campaign, I mean, we're going to keep working until the end of the inquiry, just to make sure that it's proper, that it's open, transparent, and that hopefully, it's fruitful. So.